The Bath by Janet Frame. On Friday afternoon she bought cut flowers, daffodils, anemones, a few twigs of red-leaved shrub, wrapped in mauve waxed paper. For Saturday was the 17th anniversary of her husband's death, and she planned to visit his grave, as she did each year, to weed it and put fresh flowers in the 2 jam jars standing one on each side of the tombstone. Her visit this year occupied her thoughts more than usual. She had bought the flowers to force herself to make the journey that each year became more hazardous, from the walk to the bus stop, the change of buses at the Octagon, to the bitterness of the winds blowing from the open sea across almost unsheltered rows of tombstones, and the tiredness that overcame her when it was time to return home, when she longed to find a place beside the graves in the soft grass and fall asleep. That evening she filled the coal bucket, stoked the fire. Her movements were slow and arduous. Her back and shoulder gave her so much pain. She cooked her tea, liver and bacon, set her knife and fork on the tea towel she used as a tablecloth, turned up the volume of the polished red radio to listen to the weather report and the news, ate her tea, washed her dishes, then sat drowsing in the rocking chair by the fire, waiting for the water to get hot enough for a bath. Visits to the cemetery, the doctor, and to relatives to stay always demanded a bath. When she was sure that the water was hot enough and her tea had been digested, she ventured from the kitchen through the cold passageway to the colder bathroom. She paused in the doorway to get used to the chill of the air, then she walked slowly, feeling with each step the pain in her back, across to the bath. And though she knew that she was gradually losing the power in her hands, she managed to retch on the stiff, cold and hot taps and half fill the bath with warm water. How wasteful, she thought, that with the kitchen fire always burning during the past month of frost, and the water almost always hot, getting in and out of a bath had become such an effort that it was not possible to bath every night, nor even every week. She found a big towel and laid it ready over a chair, arranged a chair so that should difficulty arise, as it had last time she bathed, she would have some way of rescuing herself. Then, with her night clothes warming on a page of newspaper inside the coal oven, and her dressing gown across the chair to be put on the instant she stepped away from the bath, she undressed, and pausing first to get her breath, and clinging tightly to the slippery yellow-stained rim that now seemed more like the edge of a cliff with a deep drop below into the sea, slowly and painfully she climbed into the bath. "I'll put on my nightie the instant I get out," she thought. The instant she got out, indeed. She knew it would be more than a matter of instants, yet she tried to think of it calmly, without dread, telling herself that when the time came, she would be very careful, taking the process step by step, surprising her bad back and shoulder and her powerless wrists into performing feats they might usually rebel against. But the key to controlling them would be the surprise, the slow stealing up on them, with care, with thought. Sitting upright, not daring to lean back or lie down, she soaped herself, washing away the dirt of the past fortnight, seeing with satisfaction how it drifted about on the water as a sign that she was clean again. Then, when her washing was completed, she found herself looking for excuses not to try yet to climb out. These old woman's fingernails, cracked and dry, where germs could lodge, would need to be scrubbed again. The skin of her heels, too, growing so hard that her feet might have been turning to stone. Behind her ears, where a thread of dirt lay in the rim. After all, she did not have the luxury of a bath, did she? How warm it was! She drowsed a moment. If only she could fall asleep, then wake to find herself in her nightdress in bed for the night. Slowly she rewashed her body, and when she knew she could no longer deceive herself into thinking she was not clean, she reluctantly replaced the soap, brush and flannel in the groove at the side of the bath, feeling as she loosened her grip on them that all strength and support were ebbing from her. Quickly she seized the nail brush again, but its magic had been used and was gone. It would not adopt the role she tried to urge upon it. The flannel too and the soap were frail flotsam to cling to in the hope of being borne to safety. She was alone now. For a few moments she sat swilling the water against her skin, perhaps as a mean of buoying up her courage. Then resolutely she pulled out the plug, sat feeling the tide swirl and scrape at her skin and flesh, trying to draw her down into the earth. Then the bathwater was gone in a soapy gurgle, and she was naked and shivering and had not yet made the attempt to get out of the bath. How slippery the surface had become. In future, she would not clean it with kerosene. She would use the paste cleaner that, left on overnight, gave the enamel rough patches that could be gripped with the skin. She leaned forward, feeling the pain in her back and shoulder. She grasped the rim of the bath, and her fingers slithered from it almost at once. She would not panic, she told herself. She would try gradually, carefully, to get out. Again, she leaned forward. Again, her grip loosened as if iron hands had deliberately uncurled her stiffened blue fingers from their trembling hold. Her heart began to beat faster. Her breath came more quickly. Her mouth was dry. She moistened her lips. If I shout for help, she thought, no one will hear me. No one in the world will hear me. No one will know I'm in the bath and can't get out. She listened and could only hear the drip, drip of the cold water tap of the wash basin and a corresponding whisper and gurgle of her heart as if it were beating underwater. All else was silent. Where were the people, the traffic? Then she had a strange feeling of being under the earth, of a throbbing in her head like wheels going over the earth above her. Then she told herself sternly that she must have no nonsense, that she had really not tried to get out of the bath. She had forgotten the strong, solid chair and the grip she could get on it. If she made the effort quickly, she could first take hold of both sides of the bath, pull herself up, then transfer her hold to the chair and thus pull herself out. She tried to do this. She just failed to make the final effort. Pale now, gasping for breath, she sank back into the bath. She began to call out, but as she had predicted, there was no answer. No one had heard her. No one in the houses or the street or Dunedin or the world knew that she was imprisoned. Loneliness welled in her. If John were here, she thought, if we were sharing our old age, helping each other, this would never have happened. She made another effort to get out. Again, she failed. Faintness overcoming her, she closed her eyes, trying to rest. Then recovering and trying again and failing, she panicked and began to cry and strike the sides of the bath. It made a hollow sound like a wild drum beat. Then she stopped striking with her fists. She struggled again to get out, and for over half an hour she stayed alternately struggling and resting until at last she did succeed in climbing out and making her escape into the kitchen. She thought, I'll never take another bath in this house or anywhere. I never want to see that bath again. This is the end or the beginning of it. In future, a district nurse will have to come to attend me. Submitting to that will be the first humiliation. There will be others and others. In bed at last, she lay exhausted and lonely, thinking that perhaps it might be better for her to die at once. The slow progression of difficulties was a kind of torture. There were her shoes that had to be made specially in a special shape or she could not walk. There were the times she had to call in a neighbour to fetch a pot of jam from the top shelf of her cupboard when it had only been a year ago that she herself had made the jam and put it on the shelf. Sometimes a niece came to fill the coal bucket or mow the lawn. Every week there was the washing to be hung on the line. This required a special technique, for she could not raise her arms without at the same time finding some support in the dizziness that overcame her. She remembered with a sense of the world narrowing and growing darker, like a tunnel, the incredulous, almost despising look on the face of her niece when, in answer to the comment, "How beautiful the clouds are in Dunedin. These big, billowing white and grey clouds, don't you think, Auntie? She had said her disappointment at the misery of things, putting a sharpness in her voice. I never look at the clouds. She wondered how long ago it was since she had been able to look up at the sky without reeling with dizziness. Now she did not dare look up. There was enough to attend to down and around, the cracks and hollows in the footpath, the patches of frost and ice and the potholes in the road, the approaching cars and motorcycles, and now, after all the outside menaces, the inner menace of her own body. She had to be guardian now over her arms and legs, force them to do as she wanted, when how easily and dutifully they had walked, moved and grasped in the old days. They were the enemy now. It had been her body that had showed treachery when she tried to get out of the bath. If she ever wanted to bathe again, how strange it seemed, she would have to ask another human being to help her to guard and control her own body. Was this so fearful, she wondered? Even if it were not, it seemed so. She thought of the frost slowly hardening outside on the fences, roofs, windows and streets. She thought again of the terror of not being able to escape from the bath. She remembered her dead husband and the flowers she had bought to put on his grave. Then, thinking again of the frost, its whiteness, white like a new bath, of the anemones and daffodils and the twigs of the red-leaved shrub, of John, dead 17 years, she fell asleep, while outside, within 2 hours, the frost began to melt with the warmth of a sudden wind blowing from the north, and the night grew warm like a spring night, and in the morning the light came early. The sky was pale blue, and the same warm wind, as gentle as mere breath, was blowing, and a narcissus had burst its bud in the front garden. In all her years of visiting the cemetery, she had never known the wind so mild. On an arm of the peninsula exposed to the wind from 2 stretches of sea, the cemetery had always been a place to crouch shivering in overcoat and scarf while the flowers were set on the grave and the narrow garden cleared of weeds. Today, everything was different. After all the frosts of the past month, there was not a trace of chill in the air. The mildness and warmth were scarcely to be believed. The sea lay violet-coloured, hush-hushing, turning and heaving, not breaking into foamy waves. It was one sinuous ripple from shore to horizon, and its sound was the muted sound of distant forests of peace. Picking up the rusted garden fork that she knew lay always in the grass of the next grave, long neglected, she set to work to clear away the twitch and other weeds, exposing the first bunch of dark blue primroses with yellow centres, a clump of autumn lilies, and the shoots 6 inches high of daffodils. Then removing the green slime jam jars from their grooves on each side of the tombstone, she walked slowly, stiff from her crouching, to the ever-dripping tap at the end of the lawn path where, filling the jars with pebbles and water, she rattled them up and down to try and clean them of slime. Then she ran the sparkling ice-cold water into the jars, and balancing them carefully one in each hand, she walked back to the grave where she shook the daffodils, anemones, red leaves from their wax paper, and dividing them, put half in one jar, half in the other. The dark blue of the anemones swelled with a sea colour as their heads rested against the red leaves. The daffodils were short-stemmed, with big, ragged rather than delicate trumpets, the type for blowing, and their scent strong. Finally, remembering the winds that raged from the sea, she stuffed small pieces of the screwed-up waxed paper into the top of each jar, so the flowers would not be carried away by the wind. Then, with a feeling of satisfaction, I look after my husband's grave after 17 years. The tombstone is not cracked or blown over. The garden has not sunk into a pool of clay. I look after my husband's grave. She began to walk away between the rows of graves, noting which were and were not cared for. Her father and mother had been buried here. She stood now before their grave. It was a roomy grave made in the days when there was space for the dead, and for the dead with money, like her parents, extra space, should they need it. Their tombstone was elaborate, though the writing was now faded. In death, they kept the elaborate station of their life. There were no flowers on the grave, only the feathery sea grass, soft to the touch, lit with gold in the sun. There was no sound but the sound of the sea and one row of fir trees on the brow of the hill. She felt the peace inside her. The nightmare of the evening before seemed far away, seemed not to have happened. The senseless, terrifying struggle to get out of a bath. She sat on the concrete edge of her parents' grave. She did not want to go home. She felt content to sit here quietly with the warm, soft wind flowing around her, and the sigh of the sea rising to mingle with the sighing of the firs and the whisper of the thin gold grass. She was grateful for the money, the time and forethought that had made her parents' grave so much bigger than the others nearby. Her husband, cremated, had been allowed only a narrow 18 inches by 2 feet, room only for the flecked grey tombstone, in memory of my husband John Edward Haraway, died August 6, 1948, and the narrow garden of spring flowers. Whereas her parents' grave was so wide and its concrete wall was a foot high, it was, in death, the equivalent of a quarter-acre section before there were too many people in the world. Why, when the world was wider and wider, was there no space left? Or was the world narrower? She did not know. She could not think. She knew only that she did not want to go home. She wanted to sit here on the edge of the grave, never catching any more buses, crossing streets, walking on icy footpaths, turning mattresses, trying to reach jam from the top shelf of the cupboard, filling coal buckets, getting in and out of the bath. Only to get in somewhere and stay in. To get out and stay out. To stay now, always, in one place. 10 minutes later, she was waiting at the bus stop, anxiously studying the destination of each bus as it passed, clutching her money since concession tickets were not allowed in the weekend, thinking of the cup of tea she would make when she got home, of her evening meal, the remainder of the liver and bacon, of her nephew in Christchurch who was coming with his wife and children for the school holidays, of her niece in the home expecting her third baby. Cars and buses surged by, horns tooted, a plane droned, near and far, near and far. Children cried out, dogs barked. The sea, in competition, made a harsher sound, as if its waves were now breaking in foam. For a moment, confused after the peace of the cemetery, she shut her eyes, trying to recapture the image of her husband's grave, now bright with spring flowers, and her parents' grave, wide, spacious, with room should the dead desire it to turn and sigh and move in dreams, as if the two slept together in a big, soft grass double bed. She waited, trying to capture the image of peace. She saw only her husband's grave made narrower, the spring garden whittled to a thin strip. Then it vanished, and she was left with the image of the bathroom, of the narrow, confining bath, grass yellow as old baths are, not frost white, waiting, waiting for one moment of inattention, weakness, pain, to claim her forever.